February 14, 1933. 4:32 a.m. The basement of the Cotton Club was almost completely dark, lit by a single naked bulb swaying on a loose wire. 12 men stood in a loose circle, coats heavy with winter rain, fingers already tightening around triggers. At the center of the room stood one man, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, 27 years old, alone with nowhere to run. 12 guns. One exit. No witnesses. This was supposed to be an execution ordered by Dutch Schultz, a message to Harlem that resistance was over. Yet minutes later, only one man would crawl out of that basement alive, and he would carry something stranger than a body or a bullet wound. He would carry a playing card. How does a man survive 12 assassins in total darkness? And how does that single night turn a street enforcer into the most feared power broker in Harlem history? Because what left that basement wasn't just a survivor. It was a warning. Harlem was not for sale. To understand why 12 guns failed in a Cotton Club basement, you have to understand Harlem in the 1930s, not as a neighborhood but as an ecosystem built under pressure. The Great Depression had crushed legitimate work. Banks were closed to black families. Insurance was a rumor. Police protection was selective, transactional, and often hostile. In that vacuum, an underground economy didn't just grow, it became the bloodstream of survival. At the center of that economy was the numbers racket. Every morning, thousands of Harlem residents placed small bets, nickels, dimes, a dollar, on three-digit numbers pulled from horse tracks or stock exchange figures. To outsiders, it looked like gambling. To Harlem, it was hope. A chance, however slim, to outrun poverty without begging permission from a system designed to keep doors shut. By the early 1930s, Numbers was generating millions of dollars a year, all in cash, all unregulated, all vulnerable. That kind of money doesn't stay invisible for long. It attracts predators. Enter Dutch Schultz, a violent bootlegger from the Bronx who had already carved his reputation through intimidation and blood. To Schultz, Harlem wasn't a community, it was an open market waiting to be absorbed. His plan was simple. Take over the Numbers, replace local operators with his own men, and enforce compliance with terror. Those who refused would be beaten, disappeared, or buried. Standing in his way was Madame Stephanie St. Clair, known across Harlem as the Queen of Numbers. She ran her operation with discipline and public support, openly fighting police harassment in court and in newspapers. But St. Clair knew something else too. Lawsuits didn't stop bullets. So she hired protection. Not muscle alone, but intelligence. That's where Bumpy Johnson came in. Bumpy wasn't born into Harlem royalty. He was raised in Charleston, South Carolina, sharp-minded, volatile, and dangerous when cornered. Prison had refined him. Books, philosophy, Shakespeare, he absorbed them all. When he arrived in Harlem, he understood something most gangsters didn't. Power wasn't about how many men you could kill. It was about how many people needed you alive. While Schultz pushed in with brute force, Bumpy pushed back with structure. He enforced boundaries. He paid debts quietly. He protected women who were beaten and families who couldn't afford hospitals. Harlem didn't just know his name, they trusted it. By 1933, the city had become a chessboard. Italian Mafia families watched from a distance, calculating. Police skimmed profits where they could. Schultz grew impatient. He wanted an ending, not a negotiation. So he sent 12 men into a basement beneath the Cotton Club, believing fear would do what money could not. He was wrong, because Harlem wasn't just resisting an invasion. It was about to rewrite the rules of who controlled it and how. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was never built like a kingpin in the traditional sense. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, nor the man who needed to sit at the head of the table. He was defined by habits that seemed small but carried weight. The way he folded his napkin before standing, the way he listened longer than he spoke, the way he never reached for a weapon first. Born in Charleston and shaped by early violence, Bumpy learned young that raw strength fades quickly, but memory, fear mixed with respect, lasts. Prison sharpened that understanding. While others lifted weights, Bumpy read Shakespeare, philosophy, history. He came out believing loyalty was not emotional, but transactional, and respect was not demanded, only demonstrated. From the age of 16, he carried a straight razor, not because he needed it often, but because its presence changed conversations before they began. The first man to challenge that philosophy was Dutch Schultz. Schultz was a predator who believed territory belonged to whoever was willing to spill the most blood for it. Harlem, to him, was unfinished business. He didn't care about its people, its rhythms, or its fragile balance, only the numbers, money flowing through it. Schultz's mistake was assuming fear worked the same everywhere. In Harlem, fear without legitimacy produced resistance. Sending 12 gunmen into the Cotton Club basement wasn't just an execution order. It was Schultz declaring he would never negotiate. That decision would eventually cost him Harlem, and later, his life. Then there was Big Sam Foster, the betrayal that cut closest. Sam was massive, 6'4", over 260 pounds, Bumpy's shadow in public and shield in private. To Bumpy, Sam wasn't an employee, he was family. But Sam had a weakness Schultz understood. A sick child and a hospital bill that Mercy would never cover. $50,000 was enough to buy hesitation. Enough to make Sam agree to raise his gun in a crowded room years later. What Sam didn't know was that Bumpy had already counted the cost of that betrayal and planned for it. If Schultz represented brute force, Lucky Luciano represented evolution. Luciano didn't want chaos. He wanted efficiency. He believed crime should function like a corporation, stable, predictable, profitable. By the mid-1940s, facing deportation and pressure from law enforcement, Luciano saw Harlem's numbers racket as a long-term revenue stream, not a battlefield. He arrived at the Stork Club not to threaten, but to bargain. What he underestimated was that Bumpy understood leverage better than percentage points. The most painful figure in Bumpy's orbit was Marcus "Smooth" Henderson. Smooth was groomed, trusted, and elevated. When Bumpy was sent to Alcatraz, Smooth kept the machine running. 11 years passed. Profits grew. And somewhere in that time, loyalty thinned. Smooth didn't want to borrow power anymore, he wanted to own it. Cutting deals behind Bumpy's back with Italian interests felt safe, even logical. Smooth believed time had erased debt. He was wrong. Finally, there was Sal Benano, nephew of Joe Benano, young, arrogant, and eager to prove himself. Sal's power came from his name, not his judgment. When he walked into Wells' restaurant with 6 armed men, he believed numbers and bloodlines would protect him. He didn't understand Harlem. He didn't understand Bumpy. And he didn't understand that disrespect, once spoken publicly, demands a response far sharper than a bullet. Each of these men wanted something different: money, control, survival, recognition. What tied them together was one shared miscalculation. They believed Bumpy Johnson was reacting to events. In truth, he was always 3 moves ahead, waiting patiently for the moment when a lesson would travel farther than violence ever could. Every legend about Bumpy Johnson is anchored to a room. Not a street corner, not a drive-by, but enclosed spaces where exits were limited, witnesses unavoidable, and choices irreversible. Bumpy understood something fundamental: control the room, and you control the outcome. Each confrontation that defined his reign was staged in a place chosen carefully, not for safety but for meaning. The first room was the basement of the Cotton Club. It wasn't meant to host strategy. It was meant to host death. The space was barely wider than a delivery truck, cluttered with wooden crates and damp concrete walls that swallowed sound. One naked bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, unstable shadows. There was only one staircase out. 12 men knew this. Bumpy knew it too. The basement was chosen because Schultz believed darkness and numbers guaranteed obedience. What he failed to calculate was that darkness could be weaponized by someone who had already memorized every inch of the room. Years later, the stage shifted to Lenox Lounge, a Harlem institution packed shoulder to shoulder on Friday nights. On September 12, 1958, more than 300 people filled the room. Jazz humming, glasses clinking, laughter spilling into the street. Bumpy sat at a corner table with a glass of Hennessy untouched, his back to the wall. He had chosen Lenox precisely because it was public. If betrayal came here, it would come with witnesses. Big Sam stood nearby, heavy coat hiding a .38 revolver, one that had already been stripped of its firing pin. In this room, violence wouldn't echo. It would stall. The third room was Small's Paradise, a club known for bright lights and late hours, a place where nobody rushed their meals. Marcus Smooth Henderson always sat at table 7, ordering ribs and cognac, his confidence built on routine. On June 11, 1963, 3 days after Bumpy walked out of prison, that routine became a trap. Beneath the table, 3 of Bumpy's men rested shotguns against their knees, unseen but close enough to feel. The room was full, around 250 patrons, not obstacles but amplifiers. Whatever happened here would be retold by morning. Then there was the Stork Club, Manhattan's velvet-lined symbol of elite power. Politicians, movie stars, and mob bosses shared air heavy with perfume and cigar smoke. In a private VIP room in 1946, Bumpy took a seat that wasn't offered, Lucky Luciano's seat. On the table sat a slim briefcase containing a single photograph. Albert Anastasia shaking hands with a police officer. In a room built for illusion, that image threatened exposure. The Stork Club wasn't chosen for intimidation. It was chosen because reputation dies faster there than anywhere else. The final room was Wells' Restaurant, modest, crowded, and unmistakably Harlem. 40 diners filled the space, forks scraping plates, the smell of ribs and collard greens clinging to the air. Bumpy was there with his wife, eating quietly. When Sal Bonanno entered with 6 armed bodyguards, he believed the guns changed the math. What he didn't understand was that every person in that room represented a debt Bumpy had paid, a favor returned, or a family protected. The room was already armed with memory. Across all 5 locations, the pattern was the same. Bumpy never arrived unprepared. He counted guns. He counted exits. He counted witnesses. He placed objects, a razor, a photograph, a modified weapon, where words would fail. And most importantly, he chose rooms where the aftermath would spread faster than any police report. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't just defeat his enemies. He made sure everyone knew how it happened. Cotton Club basement, February 14, 1933. 4:32 a.m. The first shot never came. That was the mistake. The 12 men hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Bumpy Johnson to register the scrape of shoes on concrete, the smell of damp wool, the rhythm of breathing around him. Someone laughed. Tommy, the executioner. Confident, bored. Bumpy looked up at the bulb and said quietly, almost politely, "Is that all you brought?" The laugh died. His hand went up, fast and violent, shattering the bulb. Darkness swallowed the room. In that instant, the rules changed. Bumpy moved where sound betrayed bodies, elbows, knees, wrists, using memory and timing instead of sight. One man went down choking. Another struck air and met concrete. In the chaos, gun barrels collided, shots misfired, and fear multiplied itself. When the lights came back, car headlights from the alley, 11 men were sprawled or bleeding. One man, Marty Delaney, crawled up the stairs, shaking, clutching a blood-smeared ace of spades pressed into his palm. The message was simple. Take this back. Harlem doesn't sell. Lenox Lounge, September 12, 1958. Friday night. The room was alive. 300 voices stacked on each other. A trumpet flirting with a drum line. Glasses sweating on tabletops. Big Sam stood behind Bumpy, the way he always had. The moment came not with a shout, but with a shift. Sam's weight moving forward, his hand rising. The gun aimed. The trigger pulled. Click. The sound cut through the music like a snapped string. Silence rippled outward. Bumpy turned slowly, lifted his glass, took a single sip and said, "I've been counting on you." He reached into his jacket and placed a thick envelope on the table, hospital bills paid in full. Sam's face collapsed. The room understood what had happened without a word. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't order blood. He ordered exile. Sam was escorted out, alive, carrying a lesson that would travel farther than a funeral. Money can buy a moment, but it can't buy your way back home. Small's Paradise, June 11, 1963. Table 7. Marcus Smooth Henderson smiled when Bumpy walked in. It was the smile of a man who believed time had done the forgiving for him. Plates arrived, ribs, cognac poured. Bumpy folded his napkin, a small ritual, then asked Smooth's bodyguards to step away. They hesitated. Then they obeyed. Under the table, shotguns rested like punctuation marks. Bumpy set a straight razor on the wood. Not threatening, just present. 11 years, he said, almost conversational. Smooth began to speak. The razor moved first. Not a killing stroke, worse. A precise cut, clean and shallow, drawing a line across Smooth's cheek. The room froze. Blood beaded, then ran. Bumpy leaned in. "You'll remember this," he said. Smooth was allowed to leave alive, wearing a mark that Harlem would read without explanation. By morning, everyone knew. Betrayal had a face now. Stork Club, 1946. VIP room. The chairs were leather, the lighting kind. Bumpy sat where he wanted. Lucky Luciano smiled the way men smile when they plan to win on numbers. 40%, Luciano said, as if offering mercy. Bumpy opened the briefcase and slid a photograph onto the table. No speech, no flourish, just an image that could end careers. The room went quiet. Luciano studied Bumpy's eyes and saw no hurry there. Negotiation followed, not as a threat, but as a conclusion. 10%. No Italian soldiers in Harlem. Business without occupation. Hands were shaken. History changed without a shot fired. Wells Restaurant, 1948. Dinner hour. Forks paused midair when Sal Benano spoke the word. Disrespect hung heavier than smoke. Bumpy didn't stand. He placed the razor on the table, then began counting, not men but lives. Names, bills paid, children protected. He looked up and said 6 words, evenly spaced. "Your uncle will bury you tomorrow." Sal's confidence drained. Apologies followed, first to Bumpy's wife, then to the room. The 6 guns left without rising. Harlem had made its decision. Each confrontation ended the same way, not with bodies but with messages. Darkness could be owned. Triggers could fail. Time could be collected. Images could outweigh bullets. Rooms could choose sides. Bumpy Johnson didn't just win fights. He taught Harlem and the men circling it how power actually worked. The man who crawled out of the Cotton Club basement did not speak to police. He didn't need to. By the time dawn reached Harlem, the story had already outrun him. In barbershops, on stoops, behind counters, one sentence spread faster than any headline. 12 went in, 1 came out. Dutch Schultz called an emergency meeting within days. Not to plan revenge, but to reassess risk. Harlem, he realized too late, was not a territory you seized. It was a community that pushed back. Months later, Schultz would be gunned down in New Jersey after defying the commission, but long before that, he had already lost Harlem. The Ace of Spades did its job. Big Sam's fate unfolded more quietly. He left New York under cover of night, drifting west to Detroit where no one knew his face. He worked construction, kept his head down, and never carried a gun again. People who crossed paths with him later remembered one thing. Sam never spoke about Harlem unless asked, and even then he spoke with regret. The money that tempted him had evaporated. The lesson stayed. Among the 5 families, Sam's story became shorthand. If Bumpy knows before you act, you're already finished. Marcus Smooth Henderson boarded a bus to Philadelphia with a scarf pulled tight around his face. The scar never healed cleanly. It didn't have to. In Harlem, it became a symbol, proof that betrayal didn't always end in death, but it always ended in exposure. Within a year, 3 smaller crews abandoned attempts to take over Smooth's old territory. None of them wanted to wear a mark that couldn't be hidden. Bumpy reclaimed the ground not with raids, but with silence. No challenge came. The meeting at the Stork Club produced the most far-reaching consequences. Luciano returned to Italy, his legal battles continuing, but the 10% agreement held. For more than 2 decades, Italian families honored it. No soldiers crossed into Harlem. No open intimidation followed. The arrangement wasn't written, signed, or enforced by courts, but it functioned. Harlem remained black-controlled, mafia-influenced only at the ledger. In the underworld, this became a case study. Occupation breeds resistance. Partnership breeds profit. Sal Bonanno's humiliation at Wells' restaurant traveled even faster. Within weeks, whispers reached Brooklyn that Joe Bonanno had reprimanded his nephew personally. Sal never returned to Harlem. He died young, of a heart attack in 1952, his ambition having burned hotter than his judgment. Wells' restaurant became something else entirely. People ate there knowing they were in a space protected not by guns, but by collective memory. As these stories stacked on each other, something changed. Harlem's numbers racket stabilized. Violence dropped. The police adjusted tactics, finding fewer opportunities to exploit chaos. Bumpy Johnson's reputation grew into something harder to quantify. He wasn't just feared. He was relied upon. People came to him to settle disputes, not escalate them. Mothers sent sons to him to learn discipline. Business owners slept easier knowing the rules were clear. The Italian Mafia understood the lesson too. They stopped asking how many men Bumpy had. They asked how many people stood with him. And the answer was always the same: enough. Power in Harlem had taken on a new shape. It moved through favors repaid, debts remembered, and rooms that quietly chose sides. Bumpy Johnson became the center not because he demanded it, but because the system around him aligned itself that way. Violence had been replaced with consequence, fear with calculation, chaos with an uneasy order. And that order would last until the next generation tried to forget how it was built. By the time the stories settled into memory, people stopped asking how strong Bumpy Johnson was. They started asking why the room always bent his way. The answer was never a single fight or a single threat. It was a pattern, repeated so consistently that even his enemies learned to read it. Bumpy didn't rule Harlem with fear alone. He ruled it with predictability. If you were loyal, you were protected. If you were greedy, you were exposed. If you were disrespectful, you were corrected publicly, precisely, and in a way you couldn't erase. That was the real meaning behind the phrase that followed him for decades. Harlem doesn't sell. It wasn't bravado. It was policy. Harlem could negotiate. Harlem could compromise. But it would never surrender its dignity for a percentage or a gun barrel. In a world built to exclude, Bumpy Johnson created a parallel order, one that forced the powerful to deal on his terms or not at all. The tragedy and the lesson is that this kind of power was never transferable. It depended on memory, relationships, and trust accumulated over years. When later figures tried to copy only the violence without the restraint, the structure collapsed. Respect without responsibility is just intimidation wearing a suit. So the questions remain. If you were Big Sam, would you have pulled the trigger? If you were Marcus Smooth, would you have mistaken time for forgiveness? If Lucky Luciano offered you 40%, would you have known when to say no? And if someone insulted you in your own house, would you reach for a gun or for the room? Because in Harlem, the most dangerous weapon was never the razor or the revolver. It was the understanding that power belongs to those the community refuses to abandon. If this story helped you see that world more clearly, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who appreciates history told without shortcuts. And if you want to go deeper into Bumpy's years at Alcatraz or his connection to Malcolm X, let us know in the comments. The next chapter is even darker.